Hello, my name is Ronnie Manning, and I'm the Director of Public Relations at YubiKey. We would like to thank you for joining us today for our webinar, One Device, Many Functions Inside the YubiKey. Presenting today will be Sue Heim, Information Development Manager, and David Maples, Solutions Engineer from YubiKey. The webinar will go approximately 35 to 40 minutes with a Q&A session to follow. To submit your questions, please use the questions form in the GoToWebinar menu on the right side of your screen. Thank you again for attending, and now I would like to pass it off to Sue.
Thank you, Ronnie. My name is Sue, so David and I will be leading this presentation. Next slide, please. Before we dive into the details of the YubiKey, let's take a quick look at the landscape of the most common authentication technologies. Conventional wisdom is that there's a trade-off between security, convenience, and low cost. First off, we have a smart card. The smart card, based on public key crypto, offers high security, protecting against phishing and man-in-the-middle attacks, but it also comes with high costs and then the complexity of readers, drivers, client software, and CAs. The one-time password offers lower security, but without the complex infrastructure. A phone has become popular for generating one-time passwords, but it's also become vulnerable for phishing and mobile malware. Some computers have built-in security chips, as do phones, but making your authenticator part of your integrated computing device has benefits and limitations, and also includes a limitation in your security. So recently, there's been a lot of buzz about biometrics. Our CEO recently bought the Nexus 5X phone, so when she planned to try out the biometrics on that phone to unlock it, she got a notification message, and it said, "Be aware that biometrics can be lower security than a PIN." For me, biometrics usually fails. On my iPhone, my fingerprint is often not recognized. So fingerprints, while they can be convenient, they're basically a static identity that can be copied, but they also can be painful to revoke. What are we trying to do here? With a YubiKey, we can leverage a range of strong, open authentication protocols, but we made it work out of the box with a simple touch for any number of services. Next slide, please. This slide shows our two form factors. We have on the left the YubiKey with our keychain. You place the YubiKey in the USB port and you just tap the blinking light in the gold area. In the center we show the nano form factor. With this one, the YubiKey fits entirely in the USB port. You just touch the golden edge to generate your login credentials. When you touch the YubiKey, you're just proving that you're a human on the other side, that you're not a robot or a Trojan. Remember that this is not a biometric. All you're doing is just proving that you're really a person there. And then for mobile devices that support NFC, we have the YubiKey Neo, and you just tap it to the back of the phone. Next slide, please. So our business model is pretty simple. We offer our YubiKeys online with free open source servers. We allow anyone to integrate their own software and their services or their enterprise IT systems. Today, we've shipped millions of YubiKeys to hundreds of thousands of customers to more than 150 countries, deployed by 8 of the top 10 internet companies. They use them internally and have or are in the process of making support for their end users. And you can see that some of these bigger companies are listed right here. Next slide, please. So now let's take a look at some of the details of what make up our offerings. At the bottom here, you can see our hardware. We have our nano form factor and our keychain form factor. and they communicate over USB or NFC. And this is the foundation of our YubiKey. Next, we have our software. These are software applets, and they support a wide variety of authentication and crypto protocols, one-time password, including OAuth and YubiKey OTP, public key crypto, such as FIDO U2F, PIV, and OpenPGP. The hardware and the software, these basically make up what is a YubiKey. And our products, they are priced from $18 to $50, depending on the number of protocols that you have inside of the device. And for services, we offer support, a validation service, and customization services. And then finally, we have a YubiHSM. That's basically a lightweight hardware security module. It's designed to protect your encryption secrets on servers. Next slide, please. So where can I use the YubiKey? Where can you use the YubiKey? There's a lot of pictures on this screen, so I'm just going to break it down. Where do I use my YubiKey? I have my YubiKey in my hand right here. So what I do is on my single YubiKey, I have OTP for my LastPass account, my corporate Salesforce account, and WordPress. Then I also use PIV to log into my Windows environment. And then finally, I use the exact same YubiKey to log into my Google accounts, my Dropbox account, and my GitHub account. One single YubiKey, one touch, all at the same time. Super, super easy. All of these, plus, and then there's OpenPGP, which I don't actually have integrated on this one key. Next slide, please. So now I'm going to pass the presentation over to David. He is going to talk a little bit more about all of these different protocols and use cases. David?
Pleasure to meet you all. I'm David Maples, Senior Solutions Engineer here at YubiKey. And as Sue was just mentioning to you, the YubiKey has a whole host of solutions incorporated into it because we don't go with a one-size-fits-none solution. We go with you will make the YubiKey work with how you need it. It will fit your needs. A single YubiKey, as you can see, supports a whole host of customizable services that can be configured to meet what you need for authentication security. All too often, the YubiKey authentication measures fail because users are resistant to following out-of-the-box instructions that don't match their environment. With the YubiKey, we aim to mitigate this by offering you many options and many ways on the same device. Next slide, please. So there are many, thank you. There are many supported authentication modes on the YubiKey. Let's start with the YubiKey OTP. This is where the YubiKey will enter a text code on touch. It requires no drivers or software, and the code is actually sent as a series of keystrokes directly to wherever the cursor is pointing. You can put this into a web field, you can put this into a text document, you can put it into a local application. Anything that accepts keyboard input will accept a YubiKey OTP. The OTP mode is great for existing systems like logging into content management systems, web-based applications like LastPass, VPNs, or others. Now, the YubiKey works across multiple environments, that's Windows, Linux, and OS X, because it identifies itself as a keyboard, not as a specific YubiKey device, but a generic keyboard, and can use the default drivers in each operating system to allow it to pass the OTP directly. Next slide, please. Now, as I mentioned earlier, unlike other tokens, you can configure the YubiKey to meet your needs. Every mode supported by the YubiKey has its own advantages and disadvantages. The YubiKey OTP, which was developed in conjunction with the YubiKey's unique features in that instead of a user having to type in a long 6 or 8 digit code, curse when they entered it incorrectly, and then type it in again, enters the code directly. So we were able to make the YubiKey OTP a 44-character code, over 5 times longer than any OAuth code. This allows us to put a lot more data in there. And keeps track of the usage. You'll never get a YubiKey OTP out of sync because it keeps track of how many times the YubiKey has been used and passes that information in each OTP to the server. The server checks that against its data logs and it makes sure that the OTP generated by that YubiKey is above or has a higher counter than any previously generated OTP. This protects against replay attacks, somebody trying to capture your OTP and reuse it. But not every solution supports the YubiKey OTP, so we also support the oath, event-based, and time-based tokens. You're probably familiar with them. They're the ones, like I mentioned, that have the 6 or 8-digit code. Google Authenticator is actually a time-based oath code. The YubiKey can take the place of your Google Authenticator app on your phone, securing your data on a device designed for security, rather than on a phone where it can be targeted for malicious attacks. And that brings us to our ultimate point. You can generate and load your own secrets onto the YubiKey. You, the customer, the integrator, the deployer, you are the only ones who have access to the secrets loaded on the device and on the validation server. You don't have to worry about mishandling of secrets on the side of YubiKey. You don't need to worry about them being compromised because of something YubiKey has done. You have complete control. Now, the YubiKey OTP is free and easy to integrate into both internal and customer-facing services. To aid with this, we offer the YubiCloud. It's already in use in many of the options available here, such as Salesforce or LastPass. We also support and ping ID in Salesforce, I do beg your pardon. But as we mentioned earlier, the same server code we use for our open source and free YubiCloud, we make available as source code to anybody who wants to download it and integrate it directly. This is how it's used by Duo Security, how it's used by Okta, and RC Devs. This three-pronged host, you can either configure your own server, you can leverage the YubiKey, or you can use a protocol like Oath, allows the YubiKey to be used in a whole host of services where traditional tokens, authenticators, and other methods of authentication cannot. Next slide, please. Thank you. The YubiKey, in addition to being used as an OTP device, at the same time can be used as a NIST specification PIV standard smart card for authentication. Now, PIV is an open standard released by the National Institute for Standards and Technology, which means that, like YubiKey, anybody can implement it. This means that the YubiKey PIV function can be used out of the box with Windows Server 2008 R2 and Windows 7 for Windows authentication. You don't need to load any drivers, you don't need to load any software, you don't need to do anything on your server side. Mac and Linux will need to load projects for smart card support because neither of them have inherent native support for smart cards quite yet. Next slide, please. So the PIV functions on the YubiKey support the commands, all the commands listed in this publication. You can generate keys on the secure element in the device itself. You can import existing PIV keys and certificates if you have them already in place. Or you can create certificate signing requests where if you want to generate a smart card but you're not quite ready to upload it to your certificate authority. It works with open source tools such as PKCS11 or OpenSC. YubiKey, in order to make the integration even easier, has a custom PKCS11 package which supports expanded features found only on the YubiKey. And the PIV function, besides authentication for Windows login, can be used for remote desktop authentication, storing SSL certificates for web pages and like, web services, open source smart card solution providers that support PIV, such as Center, Vitaglio, and others. You can see more on our developer site, yubi.co/piv. Next slide, if you would. Now, I mentioned earlier that the YubiKey takes the PIV function a step further than a standard smart card. Unlike smart cards, the YubiKey has the Capacitive Sensor, the little button you touch. That means that you can combine user presence with smart card authentication, and with that you get touch to sign. This allows you to store certificates for high security data on a YubiKey, plug it into your computer, and perform signing operations on a single touch. Now, this is important because it means that the YubiKey can never be tricked into signing a document or malicious code based off malware, hackers, or other attacks. You need to have physical access to the YubiKey in order to actually access it. This allows you to use your YubiKey with your certificates plugged in the machine. You don't have to worry about your code being signed maliciously or bad code being signed. You don't need to worry about someone stealing your certificate. Only the person who has physical access to that machine can perform that sign. And this is already supported by Docker, and it's included in the YubiKey open source PKCS11 library. Next slide, if you would. Next is OpenPGP, and this is a backbone of encryption in the internet for users everywhere. It's one of the more popular encryption methods, and the YubiKey can be used to hold a private PGP key securely on it and perform cryptographic operations such as encryption, decryption, signing, and the like. This can be used at the same time as the PIV standard. They're not mutually exclusive. They work together along with the OTP modes. Again, this comes back to our philosophy that the YubiKey needs to be able to meet everyone's requirements, not just a single use case that everyone has to fit into. Next slide, please. The YubiKey OpenPGP applet is fully supported in new PGP and supports up to RSA 4096-bit OpenPGP keys. You can either generate the YubiKey, the PGP key directly on your YubiKey, or if you already have a private key that you're using, you can import that into your YubiKey and use it from the secure platform. You can use it in a wide range of environments because, similar to how the YubiKey OTP mode uses default keyboard drivers, the YubiKey OpenPGP, PIV, and other smart card modes use open source smart card drivers. Like I said, with Mac and Linux, since they don't have native support, you do need to download packages, source code and whatnot to expand it, but they're all open source packages. You can use this in a wide range of environments, from securing access to servers via SSH, accessing encrypted files, or news organizations who use it and are using it to securely encrypt and send email so that if their email is compromised or if their laptops are compromised, nothing is exposed in plain text. Next slide, please. Now, the final function supported by the YubiKey is FIDO U2F. It's truly the next generation of authentication. You can use the same YubiKey for an unlimited number of services. You can literally use it with any service that supports U2F. There's no limit. There's no third party to trust. You can use it for Gmail, GitHub, and more. A single touch authenticates no matter where you are. No software, service, or personal data is required. Next slide. Thank you. The U2F protocol was designed with 4 simple guiding principles. It had to be simple to use, which means the U2F mode of the YubiKey had to work on any operating system without requiring softwares or drivers to be loaded. It had to be secure, had to go beyond what's traditionally offered in OTP as far as security. It had to reach the level of a secure public private key pair, smart card, but it had to be also immune to common attacks intercepting the authentication. It had to scale from individual users to the largest enterprises. It had to be able to be used in a single person or millions of customers. At the same time, the U2F YubiKey needed to support every service. There could not be any artificial wall between large and small. And finally, and most important, it had to protect user privacy. It had to shield the user from security breaches, had to include no personal data, and had to preserve anonymity. I'm sorry. In the event that a U2F service is breached or data is exposed, no data stored by a U2F service ever should be able to point back and replicate the U2F YubiKey. Now, this is done through keeping a unique situation. Next slide, if you would. Thank you. So, the U2F actually has a unique interaction in that it signs the challenge for any U2F site with a private key that never leaves the U2F section of the YubiKey, the secure element, that's unique for each service you use it with. Users, UToF services never have access to this private key, and this private key represents who you are. Instead, the U2F YubiKey itself signs the identification for each service you use it with, instead of a third-party service or a providing service affirming that you are who you say you are. You affirm to those services that they're valid for being registered to your person, your YubiKey, and they have no access to that. Now, this could be a little bit tricky, so YubiKey has made it easy to add U2F support. You can have an existing system that already authenticates your password and username. That's pretty much generic. What you can also do is have a separate U2F service which performs the U2F authentication, linking the two together with a common identity, such as user ID. In doing so, users can log in with their username and password, and then perform the U2F authentication with a third-party service. So that goes back to our YubiCloud, which allows you to use the YubiKey free YubiCloud to perform authentication to your existing service without you having to build up the backend support until you're ready to. Next slide, if you would. So,
okay, David, I'll take it back.
Sure thing.
So I want to share with you some stats that Google has provided to us. These stats come from their deployment of the YubiKey to their own internal users, and then from making support of the YubiKey available to their Gmail users. When Google deployed U2F to their staff and to their Gmail users, they started collecting these statistics on how U2F compared to their own Google Authenticator, their mobile app. So when they did this, they found they no longer offered the mobile authenticator to their own staff, and they found out that U2F was 4 times faster to use, that the simple touch of a U2F YubiKey was faster than having to pick up a phone, open an app, and retype a password, 4 times faster. They also found out that one of the reasons that they deployed U2F was for security. So they also found out that 1 in 50 emails that land in your email inbox are as a result of phishing attempts. And while they have great spam filters, their spam filters can't catch everything. So it's still difficult to stop individually customized phishing emails, even using a one-time password. So with U2F and with public key crypto, they saw significant fraud reduction. And then also with U2F, they were able to reduce their support costs. There's sort of this perception that paid hardware can be more costly to deploy than free software, but when the industry average cost for recovery support can be $30 per ticket, the reality is actually a lot different. With a backup YubiKey on your keychain or in your wallet or even in your USB port, they found out that users actually submitted a lot less support tickets and are at a lower risk of being locked out of their accounts when compared to those users who relied on a single phone and an app on that phone. Next slide, please. Thank you. So a common question that we hear is, well, what happens if I lose my YubiKey? As we've mentioned before, we recommend that you have a backup key, just like you have a backup for your house or a backup for your car keys. A lot of our customers and the online services that support YubiKeys also support alternative backup methods. So you may have a phone app, you may have SMS texts, or you even have backup codes. But remember that if the recovery process that you're using to access your uses a weaker authentication method, then your overall security will also be weaker. So you might need to use a less secure method to get access to your data, but be sure to obtain another YubiKey or at least use another YubiKey later on and set it up for use as soon as possible. And then for best security, we always recommend that you use an additional factor. That's why it's called second factor. The most commonly used factor is a password or a PIN, But we're also seeing YubiKey customers developing solutions where a password is replaced or combined with biometrics or even geolocation on the phone. Next slide, please. In today's presentation, we've shared the range of functions and use cases that have been enabled by a single YubiKey. We call it a Swiss Army knife, and it's an approach for encryption and authentication that has been highly appreciated by our customers and users. This slide summarizes some of the other benefits that you can see in the YubiKey, but you can find a more complete comparison chart on our website at yubico.com/wins. Before we move on to our question and answer session, there's something that I want to highlight. David sort of touched on this a little bit, but I want to bring it to your attention again. It's a feature that's become really important to us. With the YubiKey, we allow our customers to fully own and control their encryption secrets. There's no information that's ever shared or hosted by Yubico or by our manufacturing facilities. We know that it's not a matter of if or when databases of sensitive data will be hacked, so we don't want to expose our customers to that risk. This is very, very important to us. So now I'm going to turn the session over to Ronnie so that he can ask the questions that have come in, and David will be answering the questions.
Great, thanks, Sue. And if you have any additional questions, we've had some come through, but please add them in the questions drop down on the right side management console. So David, the first question that we have gotten is, my YubiKey purchased in December 2013 has NFC. How is it different from my YubiKey Neo purchased in October 2015?
Helps that I turn my mute off. In between the two dates, Yubico has been constantly upgrading the YubiKey Neo, which is what the device that you're using that supports NFC. As far as the existing standards on your earlier YubiKey Neo, they behave exactly the same as the newer models. We don't believe in planned obsolescence. We don't believe in phasing out old technology to force people to update their hardware libraries in order to have the latest and greatest. We do, however, believe in constantly including additional features as they are developed. The YubiKey, newer YubiKey, would support new features such as UToF, and worked with them with Gmail out of the box.
Great, thank you. Next one, does the GitHub YubiKey, which is U2F, work with LastPass to authenticate my LastPass login?
I believe the GitHub YubiKey was a U2F device. I could be mistaken on this. It's been a while.
Just U2F, that's correct.
All right. So LastPass has not yet added support to U2F for their service. Please feel free to write to them and say Yubico would be happy to help you integrate that. They also already support the Yubico OTP. But as it currently stands, no, the GitHub U2F's function of the YubiKey does not work with LastPass.
Thank you. Next is, will it be possible to use the YubiKey to log into a Chromebook?
I believe so. I've not done it personally. Google has very much tied U2F into their solutions, and we are currently working on PAM modules that support U2F to allow for authentication over U2F in any Linux-based authentication, which Chromebook is part of. Please feel free to go to our developer site, developers.yubico.com, U2F, to see the latest builds of our open source packages, and hopefully keep an eye out.
David, I can actually answer that question. If you're just logging into Chromebook using your Google account, then yes, you can use your U2F YubiKey to log into Chromebook. If you're trying to do anything else with it, then you would need to use our developer tools. But Chromebook and the Chrome OS support both U2F and OTP.
Great, thank you. Next is, how many YubiKeys can be registered with U2F accounts like Google and Dropbox?
It really depends on the U2F account. Google supports up to 10 per account. Dropbox, I believe, supports up to 5. It's a number set by the implementer themselves. There's no limitation in the U2F specification because, remember, each U2F device acts as a completely independent token. There's no limitations to there.
Okay. Next is, can I use touch to sign for SSH or OpenPGP?
OpenPGP does not yet support it. SSH, you can use the YubiKey PKCS11 package to extend that to SSH, but it does require a bit of development. We hope that that feature is picked up by many open source providers of SSH and OpenPGP and expanded upon as it adds a large level of security to all user interactions.
Thank you. Next is, could you give a brief comparison on the YubiKey 4 and the YubiKey Neo?
The YubiKey Neo was our premium product until very recently. The YubiKey 4 is our newest product, and it is being moved to upset the current heavyweight champion. The YubiKey Neo supports NFC where the YubiKey 4 does not yet. We expect to expand that function to the YubiKey 4 platform within this year. That being said, the YubiKey 4 also has a larger secure memory element in it, allowing it to support larger OpenPGP keys, 4096 versus the 2048 on the YubiKey Neo. It has a larger certificate store size, 3072 versus 2048 for the Neo. And that's on the PIV applet. We expect once the YubiKey 4 reaches parity with the features of the YubiKey Neo, either meeting or expanding that, we'll be able to offer the YubiKey, everything that the YubiKey Neo can do on the YubiKey 4 platform.
Great, thank you. Next question is the YubiKey waterproof?
Absolutely. As you can see on the picture here, we've had multiple take it diving. We've also had even more users send it through the washing machine. We've had users leave it in the Denver winter in the middle of the snow, slush, sleet, and salt, only to find it in the spring when the snow melts, sitting in that salt slushy pile. Pull it in, pull it out, dry it off, of course, plug it into their machine and have it work. We've even seen the YubiKey go through a dog. Yes, it is waterproof.
When do you think other browsers will support UToF?
Firefox is currently working on supporting UToF natively. They are working closely with YubiKey in order to add that functionality by year's end. Microsoft is part of the FIDO Alliance and is currently considering their options. As always, please feel free to write to any solutions provider that you'd like to support UToF and anything other feature of the YubiKey.
Thank you. Is touching the YubiKey similar to a biometric?
The YubiKey actually functions as a capacitance sensor, checking to make sure that there's a living creature on the end of the YubiKey capacitance sensor. That means some of the biometric hacks, false gloves, printed fingerprints on tape, and other common hacks against weak biometrics would not work on a YubiKey. Of course, having a finger touch would allow them to authenticate regardless. That means that you keep your YubiKey on your person. Just like you keep the keys to your car or your house on your keychain, you can keep your YubiKey on there as well. It's a rugged little device and can withstand anything you can throw at your keys.
Thank you. The next is, will the smaller form factor, which is the Nano, fall out of my USB if I'm carrying my laptop around?
If it does, there's a problem with your USB port. If anything, users have reported to us that the Nano is almost too difficult to extract. In order to meet that requirement, we also offer a small lanyard which fits in the little hole in the YubiKey Neo in order to allow you to extract it with ease. But no, it's not going to fall out by itself. If it does, you have issues and you probably need to replace your laptop.
Or at least your USB port.
Yes.
Thank you. This one is kind of in 3 questions. So what types of problems do YubiKeys see, and how, with the problem being that it's not working anymore? I guess what would the longevity of a key be?
I'd love to tell you the lifespan of the YubiKey. However, the first YubiKeys released back in 2007, 2008 still haven't died in mass. We've had users come to us at trade shows recently, within the past month, show us their first generation YubiKeys and show that it's still generating the OTP. Now, I have not seen a YubiKey die in mass because of issues. That being said, sometimes errors do slip in. There was a issue that was inherited by the YubiKeys OpenPGP applet that was built into the Java card open source project that we based it off of. We inherited this security vulnerability and we took it very, very seriously. We contacted everybody who had purchased a YubiKey with that security vulnerability and offered to replace their YubiKey free of charge, free shipping. If you can't trust YubiKey with your security, we've failed.
Thank you. Can I use a YubiKey for both my work accounts and also for personal?
That's one of the major advantages of U2F. Since every time you register a new account, it generates a unique public-private key pair that has nothing to do with any of the other key pairs that have been generated. You can use the same YubiKey on any UToF accounts. You can use it on multiple accounts to the same services, and there's no way to correlate that it's the same YubiKey. For other modes, such as OTP, PIV, and OpenPGP, it really depends on how the authentication is enabled. For the open source YubiCloud, for example, we allow you to use it with any service that supports that. However, if you're using a validation server unique to your corporate environment, then you wouldn't be able to use that configuration on an open source product.
Great, thanks. And one last question came in, and it's, do you support NFC on the iPhone?
We would very much like to. Please let Apple know that they should open up their NFC stack on their iDevice. We would very much be happy to incorporate YubiKey support for them.
Great, thank you. And one more came through. If we offer a YubiKeys for Dummies book, because they're a bit overwhelmed on the presentation. Unfortunately, we do not, but we have a lot of documentation on our website that hopefully will be able to guide you through the different use cases for the YubiKey.
So let's make a note of that.
Yeah, I'm working on getting the documentation updated and getting the website updated so that it'll be a little bit easier to locate documentation. If there's anything that you want specifically on how to know what to do, please feel free to contact us and we'll make sure that you're steered in the correct direction.
Great, thank you. So we'd like to thank everyone again for attending, and we will be sending out a follow-up email with a link to the presentation if you'd like to view it again, an online video as well. So thank you all, and hope you all have a great day.
One last thing that I would like to interject, don't forget that we are here to help protect your online identities and make the internet a safer place to be. Thank you.
Pleasure speaking with you all today. Have a great afternoon.